The conference room at Fort Bragg smelled like burnt coffee and old leather. Captain Diane Mercer stood near the back wall, holding a steel carafe in both hands. Her uniform was pressed sharp. Her dark hair was pulled tight into a regulation bun, but none of that mattered, not in this room, not to these men. "Top it off, sweetheart," said General Hawthorne without looking up from his tablet. He slid his empty mug toward the edge of the table. Diane stepped forward. She poured. She said nothing. Around the long oak table sat 9 senior officers, generals, colonels, men with decades of service and walls full of medals. They were deep into a briefing about something called Operation Granite Shield, a mission that had stalled, a problem no one could solve. She wasn't supposed to be listening, but she was. "We've run every scenario," said Colonel Briggs, a thick man with a gray mustache. "The terrain's impossible. The intel's thin. And if we send a team in blind, we'll lose them in 48 hours. General Kessler leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Then we wait. We don't have another option." "Waiting costs lives too," Hawthorne said sharply. "We've got hostages, American contractors. If we don't move soon, they're dead." Diane refilled another cup. She moved quietly along the table. Invisible. That's what they wanted her to be. She had been assigned to this role 3 weeks ago, aide to the Joint Operations Command. It sounded important on paper. But in reality, it meant pouring coffee, printing documents, fetching lunches, being seen but not heard. It wasn't what she signed up for. Diane had enlisted 12 years ago right out of a small town in Kentucky. She'd scored top marks in intelligence training. She spoke 3 languages fluently. She'd served 2 tours overseas, one in Iraq and one in Afghanistan, doing field analysis and reconnaissance work that saved lives. But 6 months ago, she'd been reassigned stateside. No explanation, no appeal, just orders. And now she stood in rooms like this one, holding a coffee pot while men who'd never seen the kind of action she had made decisions about war. "Ma'am, can you close that window?" Colonel Vance pointed toward the far wall. "It's getting cold in here." Diane set the carafe down and walked to the window. She pulled it shut, locked it, returned to her spot. No one said thank you. She didn't expect them to. General Hawthorne tapped his pen against the table. "Let's go over it again. The contractors are being held in a compound 20 miles outside Kandahar. Small village, hostile territory, no air support available due to political restrictions. Ground insertion is risky because of terrain and unpredictable militia presence. We've got satellite images," Briggs added, "but they're 2 weeks old. Anything could have changed." Kessler shook his head. "We need fresh intel, human intel, but we don't have assets on the ground anymore." Diane's jaw tightened. She knew that area. She'd been there. 4 years ago, she'd spent 8 months embedded with a local coalition near Kandahar. She knew the villages, the routes, the people. She'd even helped broker temporary ceasefires with some of the militia leaders, but she didn't speak, because she'd tried that before. 2 weeks ago, during a similar briefing, she'd made the mistake of offering input. She'd pointed out a flaw in a supply route analysis, a small one. But accurate General Kessler had looked at her like she'd spilled coffee on his lap. "Captain," he'd said slowly, "your job is to assist, not to advise." The room had gone silent. She'd nodded, stepped back, and never spoken up again. Now she just listened, and what she heard made her stomach turn. They were planning to send in a 12-man team. Special forces, good soldiers, but they'd be going in with outdated maps, limited intelligence, and no local contacts. It was a suicide mission, and they didn't even realize it. "All right," Hawthorne said finally. "We'll present this to the secretary tomorrow. Vance, get the full operational brief ready. Briggs, coordinate with JSOC. Everyone else, stay on standby." Chairs scraped. The men stood. They gathered their folders and tablets. Diane moved to collect the empty coffee mugs. As the room emptied, Colonel Briggs paused near the door. He glanced back at her. "Make sure this place is locked up when you're done, Captain." "Yes, sir." He left. The door clicked shut. Diane stood alone in the big room. She stared down at the table, at the scattered papers, the maps. The satellite images still glowing on one of the abandoned tablets. She shouldn't look. It wasn't her place. But she did anyway. She picked up one of the printed maps. It showed the compound. The surrounding hills, the narrow roads in and out, they had it all wrong. The route they were planning came from the north, exposed, visible for miles. The militia had lookouts on those hills. She'd seen them herself. If the team went that way, they'd be spotted before they got within 5 miles of the compound. But there was another route, a southern approach, through a dried riverbed that cut between 2 valleys. It was longer, harder, but it was hidden. She'd used it once to extract a wounded interpreter. The locals didn't patrol it because it flooded during the rainy season, but it wasn't the rainy season. Not for another 2 months. Diane set the map down. She felt her pulse quicken. She could tell them she could walk into Hawthorne's office right now and explain it, show them the route, give them the advantage they needed. But she already knew what would happen. They'd dismiss her. Or worse, they'd listen just long enough to take the idea, rebrand it as their own, and send her back to fetching coffee. She'd seen it happen to other women. Good officers, smart soldiers, pushed aside, ignored, used. Diane clenched her fists. She wasn't going to beg for their attention. Not again. She gathered the mugs, turned off the lights, and locked the door behind her. But as she walked down the dim hallway of the operations wing, her mind wouldn't stop. She kept seeing that map, that route, those 12 men walking into a death trap, and she kept hearing Hawthorne's voice. If we don't move soon, they're dead. He was talking about the hostages, but he could have been talking about his own team. Diane reached her small office at the end of the hall. It was barely more than a closet. A desk, a filing cabinet, a window that overlooked the parking lot. She sat down, opened her laptop, and started typing. She didn't know what she was going to do yet, but she knew one thing: she wasn't going to stay silent, not this time. Not when lives were on the line, because Diane Mercer had spent 12 years serving her country. She'd bled for it, she'd sacrificed for it, and she'd be damned if she was going to stand by and watch good soldiers die just because a room full of generals was too proud to listen to the woman who poured their coffee. So she worked, late into the night, pulling up old mission files, cross-referencing terrain data, building a full operational breakdown of the southern route. She didn't sleep. She didn't stop. And by the time the sun rose over Fort Bragg the next morning, Captain Diane Mercer had done something no one expected. She had solved the impossible mission. Now she just had to figure out how to make them listen. Diane printed the last page just after 6 in the morning. Her eyes burned. Her back ached from sitting in the cheap desk chair for hours, but the document in her hands was solid. 15 pages. Maps, coordinates, timing breakdowns, risk assessments, alternative extraction points, everything the generals needed to run this mission correctly. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she heard footsteps in the hallway. The building was waking up. Diane slipped the document into a manila folder and tucked it under her arm. She locked her office and headed toward the command wing. Her heart pounded with each step. She still wasn't sure what she was going to do. Hand it directly to Hawthorne? Leave it on his desk? Slide it into the briefing materials and hope someone noticed? None of those felt right, because she knew the truth. If her name was on it, they'd ignore it or they'd bury it. She reached the main corridor. Officers moved past her. Some nodded. Most didn't. She was part of the furniture here, always present, rarely seen. Diane turned the corner and nearly collided with Colonel Vance. "Watch it, Captain," he muttered, sidestepping her without slowing down. She steadied herself. "Sorry, sir." He didn't respond, just kept walking. Diane exhaled slowly. Then she made a decision. She walked into the empty conference room where yesterday's meeting had taken place. The same long table, the same leather chairs. This morning it was quiet. Sunlight came through the tall windows. A stack of folders sat at the head of the table. Briefing. Materials for today's meeting with the Secretary of Defense. Diane glanced toward the door. No one was coming, not yet. She opened the top folder. Operational overview, satellite images, risk summary. All the same flawed information from yesterday. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled out her own report. She could slip it in, right between the terrain analysis and the personnel breakdown, if she removed her name from the cover page. Maybe, just maybe, someone would read it on its merit. Maybe they'd see the solution and act on it. Maybe it wouldn't matter who wrote. Diane pulled a pen from her pocket and crossed out her name at the top of the first page. Then she slid the document into the stack, closed the folder, and stepped back. Her chest felt tight. She'd just gone outside the chain of command. If anyone found out, she could be reprimanded, maybe worse, but she didn't care. Not anymore. She left the room and returned to her post near the back offices, and she waited. 2 hours later, the meeting began. Diane stood in her usual spot, near the coffee station, out of the way. General Hawthorne sat at the head of the table. Beside him was Secretary Mallory, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. Colonels Briggs, Kessler, and Vance filled out the rest of the table. Hawthorne opened the briefing folder. Diane's pulse quickened. He flipped through the first few pages. The satellite images, the risk summaries, then he paused, his brow furrowed. He turned another page, then another. "What's this?" he muttered. Colonel Briggs leaned over. "What's what?" Hawthorne held up the report. "This terrain analysis. It's not the one we reviewed yesterday." Kessler squinted at it. "Let me see." Hawthorne passed it over. Diane's hands tightened around the carafe. Kessler scanned the pages. His expression shifted. Confusion first, then interest. "This is detailed," he said slowly. "Very detailed." Secretary Mallory spoke up. "What are we looking at, gentlemen?" Kessler cleared his throat. "It's an alternate route. Southern approach. Through a riverbed. Avoids the high ground entirely." He flipped through the pages. Timing estimates, militia movement patterns, even contingency extractions. Hawthorne frowned. "Who wrote this?" Silence. Kessler looked at the cover page. "No name." Vance leaned in. "It wasn't in the file yesterday." Briggs scowled. "Then how the hell did it get in there?" Diane stood perfectly still. "Don't breathe, don't move." Secretary Mallory held out her hand. "Let me see it." Kessler handed it over. The room went quiet as she read. Diane could hear her own heartbeat. Mallory's eyes moved quickly over the text. She studied the maps, the data, the analysis. Then she looked up. "This is good," she said flatly. "Better than what you presented yesterday." Hawthorne shifted in his seat. "With respect, ma'am, we don't know the source." "I don't care about the source," Mallory replied. "I care about results. This route makes sense. Why wasn't it part of the original plan?" Kessler hesitated. "We didn't have updated intelligence on that area." "Well, someone does." Mallory tapped the report. "And whoever put this together knows the terrain, the culture, the risks." She looked around the table. "I want this incorporated into the mission immediately." Hawthorne's jaw tightened. "Yes, ma'am." Mallory set the report down. "I also want to know who authored it. Because if you have someone on your staff with this level of insight, they should be in this room, not buried in some back office." Diane's breath caught. Kessler glanced at Briggs. Briggs looked at Vance. No one said anything. Secretary Mallory stood. "Figure it out, General. I'll expect an updated brief by 1600 hours. "Yes, ma'am." Mallory left the room. The door closed, and then the tension exploded. "Who the hell did this?" Hawthorne snapped. Vance shook his head. "It wasn't my staff." Kessler rubbed his temples. "Could have been someone from intelligence. Then why didn't they sign it?" Briggs growled. Hawthorne threw the report onto the table. "I don't like mysteries. And I don't like being blindsided in front of the secretary." Diane stood frozen near the wall. This was it. She could step forward, claim it. But before she could move, Colonel Vance spoke. "Maybe it's better if we don't ask too many questions," he said carefully. "The secretary liked it. It solves our problem." "Do we really want to stir things up?" Hawthorne glared at him. "You want me to run a mission based on an anonymous report?" "I want you to run a mission that works," Vance shot back. "We've been stuck on this for 2 weeks. Now we have a solution. Let's use it." Kessler nodded slowly. "He's right. We verify the intel independently. If it checks out, we move forward." Hawthorne stared at the report for a long moment, then he sighed. "Fine. But I want eyes on this. Full verification. No shortcuts." "Understood," Kessler said. The men gathered their things and filed out. Diane stayed behind. She began clearing the coffee mugs. Her hands shook slightly. They were going to use it, her plan, her route, but no one would ever know it was hers, and maybe that was okay. Maybe it didn't matter, as long as it worked, as long as those men came home, as long as the hostages were saved. Told herself that as she wiped down the table, she told herself that as she locked up the room, but deep down, a part of her burned, because she'd just handed them the answer and they still didn't see her. Over the next 3 days, Diane watched from the shadows as her plan took shape. The staff verified her intel. They confirmed the riverbed route. They adjusted the mission timeline. They briefed the Special Forces team, and through it all, no one mentioned her name because no one knew. On the 4th day, the team deployed. Diane sat in her small office. Staring at her computer screen, she couldn't access the live mission feed. That was reserved for senior command. But she knew they were out there. 12 men. Following her route, trusting her analysis. She prayed she was right. She prayed she hadn't missed anything. Because if she was wrong, if something went sideways, it would be on her, and no one would ever know. Hours passed. Diane couldn't eat, couldn't focus. She paced her tiny office like a caged animal. Finally, near midnight, she heard footsteps in the hallway, voices. She opened her door a crack. Down the hall, she saw General Hawthorne and Colonel Kessler walking together. They were smiling. Clean execution, Hawthorne said. No casualties. Hostages are safe. Kessler nodded. That southern route was perfect. Whoever figured that out saved lives. Tonight, Diane's knees nearly buckled. They did it. It worked. The men were safe. The hostages were safe. She closed the door and leaned against it. Tears stung her eyes. She'd done it, quietly, invisibly, but she'd done it, and for a moment that was enough. The next morning, Fort Bragg felt different. News of the successful mission spread fast. Soldiers talked about it in the halls. Officers congratulated each other. The hostages were safe. The team had come home without a scratch. It was a victory. A clean, decisive win in a war that rarely offered them. Diane walked through the base like a ghost. She listened to the conversations, heard the pride in their voices, saw the relief on their faces, and no one looked at her twice. She poured coffee at the morning briefing. General Hawthorne was in high spirits. So was Kessler. Even Colonel Briggs cracked a rare smile. Textbook operation, Hawthorne said, leaning back in his chair. This is the kind of precision we need to be executing every time. Secretary Mallory had sent a formal commendation. It sat on the table in a sealed envelope. Kessler opened it and read aloud. Outstanding strategic planning and execution. A model for future operations. The men nodded. Diane refilled their cups. Her hand was steady, but inside, she felt hollow. She should have been proud. She should have felt satisfied. But all she felt was invisible. After the meeting, she returned to her office and sat at her desk. She stared at the blank wall in front of her. 12 years of service, 2 combat tours, 3 languages, countless missions, supported lives, saved, and no one knew. Not really. Her phone buzzed. A text from her younger sister back in Kentucky. Saw the news about the rescue. You doing okay? Diane typed back, yeah, I'm fine. She set the phone down. She wasn't fine, but she didn't know how to explain it. She didn't know how to tell her sister that she just orchestrated one of the most important missions of the year and that she was still making coffee for the men who got the credit. 2 weeks later, things changed. It started with a phone call. Diane was in the break room refilling the industrial coffee maker when Colonel Vance appeared in the doorway. Captain Mercer. She turned. Yes, sir? General Hawthorne wants to see you. Her stomach dropped. Now? Now. She set down the coffee filter and followed him down the hall. Her mind raced. Had they found out? Did someone trace the report back to her? Was she in trouble? Vance said nothing as they walked. He knocked on Hawthorne's door. Come in, the general's voice called. Vance opened the door and gestured for Diane to enter. She stepped inside. Hawthorne sat behind his wide desk. Beside him stood a man Diane didn't recognize. Tall, gray suit. Federal agent, maybe. Or intelligence. Captain Mercer, Hawthorne said. Close the door. She did. Her pulse hammered in her ears. Hawthorne gestured to the man beside him. This is Director Paul Tennyson, Defense Intelligence Agency. Tennyson nodded at her. Captain, Diane stood at attention. Sir, Hawthorne folded his hands on the desk. We need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me. She swallowed. Of course, sir. Hawthorne picked up a familiar manila folder. Her report, he opened it. Flipped through the pages. This mission brief, he said slowly. The one that led to the successful extraction 2 weeks ago. Diane's throat went dry. We've been trying to identify the author, Hawthorne continued. No name, no signature, but the level of detail suggests someone with direct field experience in the region. Tennyson stepped forward. We cross-referenced the writing style, the data sources, the operational language. He looked directly at her. And it all points to you. Diane's heart stopped. Hawthorne's eyes were unreadable. Did you write this, Captain? For a long moment, she didn't speak. She thought about lying, thought about denying it. But she was tired. Tired of being invisible. Tired of hiding. So she lifted her chin, and she told the truth. Yes, sir. I wrote it. The room went silent. Hawthorne leaned back in his chair. Why didn't you sign it? Diane met his gaze. Because I didn't think you'd read it if you knew it came from me. The words hung in the air. Hawthorne's jaw tightened. Tennyson glanced at him, then back at Diane. You were right, Tennyson said quietly, about the route, the timing, the risks. You saved lives, Captain. Diane's throat tightened. I'm glad it worked, sir. Hawthorne exhaled slowly. He set the folder down. You went around the chain of command. Yes, sir. You inserted unauthorized materials into a classified briefing. Yes, sir. That's a serious breach of protocol. Diane didn't blink. I know, sir. Hawthorne stared at her. She waited for the reprimand, the demotion, the discharge. But instead, Hawthorne did something she never expected. He smiled. Just slightly. You've got guts, Mercer, he said. I'll give you that. Tennyson crossed his arms. General, if I may. Hawthorne nodded. Tennyson turned to Diane. Captain, your personnel file shows extensive field intelligence experience. 2 tours. High marks. Multiple commendations. Yet you've been assigned to administrative support for 6 months. Diane hesitated. Yes, sir. Do you know why? She shook her head. No, sir. I was never given a reason. Tennyson and Hawthorne exchanged a look. Hawthorne spoke. There was an incident last year. You filed a report about mismanagement of local assets during your deployment in Afghanistan. Diane's chest tightened. She remembered. A coalition commander had burned an intelligence source, got him killed, then covered it up. Diane had documented it, reported it up the chain, and nothing had happened, except her next assignment had been stateside, behind a desk. That report made some people uncomfortable, Hawthorne said carefully. So they moved you quietly. Diane's hands clenched into fists at her sides. That was wrong, Hawthorne continued. And I'm sorry. She blinked. An apology. From a General, Tennyson stepped forward. Captain Mercer, the DIA is putting together a task force. Small team. High-level strategic operations. We need people who can think critically, act independently. People who aren't afraid to tell the truth even when it's inconvenient. Diane's heart began to race. We want you, Tennyson said. She stared at him. Sir, you'd be working directly with me, he continued. Analyzing intel. Planning operations, real work. Not coffee duty. Diane felt the room tilt. This was it. The door she'd been trying to open for years. But she'd stopped knocking, and now it was opening on its own. Hawthorne stood. It's your choice, Captain. You can stay here. Keep your current assignment. Or you can take this opportunity and do what you were trained to do. Diane didn't hesitate. I'll take it, sir. Tennyson nodded. Good. Report to DIA headquarters Monday morning. We'll have your orders ready. Yes, sir. Hawthorne extended his hand. Diane shook it. His grip was firm, respectful. You should have been in that room from the start, he said quietly. That's on me. Diane nodded. Thank you, sir. She left the office, walked down the hallway, out into the bright North Carolina sun. And for the first time in 6 months, she smiled. But the story didn't end there, because 3 days later, Diane received a message. It came through official channels, a classified email. Subject line, Operation Granite Shield, follow-up. She opened it, Inside was a detailed after-action report, and at the bottom, a note from the mission commander, a special forces captain named Rojas. To whoever planned that southern route, thank you. You brought my men home. If you're ever in the field and need backup, call me. We owe you. Diane read it twice, then she printed it, folded it carefully, and tucked it into her uniform pocket. She'd carry it with her. Reminder that even when no one saw her, even when no one knew her name, her work mattered. Her voice mattered. And she had just begun to use it. On Monday morning, Diane walked into DIA headquarters in Washington, D.C. The building was sleek, modern, secure. She checked in at the front desk, was escorted to the third floor. Director Tennyson met her in a glass-walled conference room. Welcome, Captain. Thank you, sir. He gestured to a chair. She sat. Tennyson slid a folder across the table. Your first assignment, he said. Diane opened it. Inside were satellite images, intelligence summaries, a map of a remote region in Syria. We've got a situation, Tennyson said. Missing operative. Hostile territory. The Joint Chiefs are stumped. He leaned forward. I want you to solve it. Diane looked up at him. He wasn't joking. He was trusting her, fully, publicly. She pulled the folder closer, studied the images. Her mind already working, already seeing the patterns, the gaps, the solutions. How much time do I have? She asked. Tennyson smiled. As much as you need. Diane nodded and got to work. Diane spent the next 72 hours in that glass conference room. She barely slept. She lived on black coffee and vending machine, crackers. But she didn't stop. The missing operative was a CIA officer named Caleb Nash. He'd gone dark 4 days ago while tracking an arms dealer near the Turkish-Syrian border. No communication, no emergency beacon, no body. The Joint Chiefs had written him off, declared him compromised. But Tennyson didn't believe it, and now neither did Diane. She studied everything. Nash's last known location, his mission parameters, local militia activity, weather patterns, communication blackouts. Most analysts would have looked at the data and assumed the worst. Captured, dead, gone. But Diane saw something else. She saw a pattern. Nash had gone silent near a small village called Al-Hakim, the same village where cell towers had been knocked out by a sandstorm 2 days before his disappearance. No one had thought to connect the two, but Diane did. She pulled up geological surveys, storm, trajectories, infrastructure reports, and then she found it, a narrow canyon 6 miles east of the village. Deep, remote, perfect, cover from aerial surveillance. If Nash had been compromised and needed to hide, that's where he'd go. She mapped it, outcalculated travel time on foot, cross-referenced it with water sources, and then she walked into Tennyson's office. I found him, she said. Tennyson looked up from his desk. You're sure? She handed him the report. He read it quickly. His eyes sharpened. This is solid work, Captain. Thank you, sir. Tennyson picked up his phone. I'm briefing the secretary in an hour. I want you there. Diane's heart skipped. Sir, you found him. You present it. That's an order, Captain. She nodded. Yes, sir. An hour later, Diane stood in front of a room full of senior officials. Secretary Mallory sat at the head of the table. Beside her were 2 undersecretaries, a deputy director from the CIA, and General Hawthorne. Hawthorne gave Diane a small nod when she entered. She took a breath and began. 4 days ago, Caleb Nash went missing near the Syrian border, she said, her voice steady. Most analysis suggests he was captured or killed, but I believe he's alive. And I know where he is. She clicked the remote. A map appeared on the screen. This canyon, she continued, pointing, 6 miles east of Al-Hakim. It's remote, difficult to access, but it has water, cover, and it's outside the standard search grid. The deputy director leaned forward. What makes you think he's there? Timing, Diane said. Nash went dark the same day a sandstorm knocked out communications in the area. If he was being pursued and needed to disappear, this canyon is the logical choice. It matches his training, his instincts. Mallory studied the map. How confident are you? Diane met her eyes. 80%, ma'am. That's not a guarantee. No, ma'am. But it's the best lead we have. Silence. Then Mallory nodded. Send a team. The CIA deputy spoke up. Madam Secretary, with respect, we don't have assets in that region. Insertion would take days. If he's even there, then we find out. Mallory interrupted. Captain Mercer's analysis saved lives 2 weeks ago. I'm inclined to trust her again. Diane's chest swelled. Hawthorne spoke. I can have a special forces unit in position within 18 hours. Mallory nodded. Do it. 18 hours later, Diane sat in the operations center at DIA headquarters. A wall of monitors displayed live feeds from the field. Tennyson stood beside her. Hawthorne had flown in from Bragg. They watched in silence as the team moved into the canyon. Helmet cams showed narrow rock walls, shadows, dust. Angel 1. This is Overwatch, the comm officer said into his headset. You are 200 meters from the target zone. The lead operator's voice crackled back. Copy, Overwatch. Moving in. Diane's hands gripped the edge of the table. Please be there. Please let me be right. The team moved carefully, weapons raised, scanning every corner. Then, Overwatch. We have visual on a possible shelter. Stone overhang, checking now. Diane held her breath. The camera feed shifted, a shadow, movement. And then, a man stumbled into view, dirty, bearded, limping but alive. Overwatch. We have Nash. Repeat, we have Nash. He's alive. The room erupted. Cheers. Applause. Diane's knees nearly buckled. Tennyson clapped her on the shoulder. You did it. She couldn't speak. She just watched the screen as the team helped Nash to his feet, as they wrapped him in a thermal blanket, as they radioed for extraction. Hawthorne walked over to her. That's twice now, Captain. She looked up at him. He extended his hand. You've earned your place at the table. She shook it. Thank you, sir. 1 week later, Diane sat in a small cafe near DIA headquarters. She was off duty, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of her uniform. She sipped her coffee and watched the people pass by, outside the window. Her phone buzzed. A message from Director Tennyson. Nash wants to meet you. Tomorrow. 1400 hours. You free? Diane smiled. She typed back, I'll be there. The next day, she walked into a secure conference room on the 5th floor. Caleb, Nash was already there. He looked better than he had on the helmet cam. Feed, clean-shaven, rested, but there was still a hardness in his eyes. The look of someone who'd survived something ugly. He stood when she entered. Captain Mercer, Mr. Nash. He shook her hand. His grip was strong. Grateful. I'm told you're the reason I'm standing here, he said. Diane shrugged. I just did my job. You did more than that. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small challenge coin. CIA emblem, worn at the edges. He handed it to her. This was given to me when I finished my training, he said. It's supposed to remind me that I'm never alone in the field, that someone's always watching my back. He smiled. Turns out that's true. Diane looked down at the coin. Her throat tightened. Thank you, she whispered. No, Nash said. Thank you. 3 months later, Diane stood in front of a mirror in a hotel room in Arlington, Virginia. She adjusted the collar of her dress uniform. Today was different. Today, she wasn't invisible. She walked into the ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton. It was filled with military brass, senior officials, diplomats, and award ceremony. Tennyson met her at the door. You ready? She nodded. They walked to the front of the room together. Secretary Mallory stood at the podium. Today, Mallory began, we recognize individuals whose actions have directly contributed to the safety and security of this nation. Individuals who exemplify intelligence, courage, and dedication. Diane's heart pounded. Captain Diane Mercer, Mallory continued, served 2 combat tours with distinction. She speaks 3 languages. She has provided critical intelligence support for countless operations, and in recent months she has personally authored strategic plans that have saved American lives. Mallory looked directly at her. Captain Mercer was overlooked, underestimated, pushed to the side, but she did not stay silent. She did not give up. And because of her courage and skill, soldiers came home. Hostages were freed. Lives were saved. Diane felt tears sting her eyes. Mallory held up a medal, the Defense Superior Service Medal, one of the highest honors for non-combat service. Captain Mercer, please step forward. Diane walked to the podium. The room stood. Applause filled the air. Mallory pinned the medal to her chest. "Thank you for your service," she said. Quietly, Diane saluted. Mallory returned it, and then, as Diane turned to face the room, she saw them: General Hawthorne, Colonel Kessler, Director Tennyson, Caleb Nash, even Captain Rojas, the Special Forces commander from the first mission. They were all standing, all applauding, all seeing her. Finally. That night, Diane returned to her apartment in D.C. She set the medal on her dresser, sat on the edge of her bed and pulled out her phone. She scrolled to her sister's number. Typed a message. "Remember when you asked if I was okay?" A moment later, her sister replied, "Yeah. Are you?" Diane smiled. She typed back, "Yeah, I really am." She set the phone down, and for the first time in years, she felt seen, she felt heard, she felt like she mattered. Not because someone finally gave her a medal, but because she'd refused to let them make her invisible. She had stood in the shadows, served the coffee, listened to the men who wouldn't listen to her. And when it mattered most, when lives were on the line, she had spoken up quietly, carefully, powerfully, and she had changed everything. Epilogue. 2 years later, Diane Mercer was promoted to major. She led a team of analysts at DIA. She briefed senators. She trained the next generation of intelligence officers. And she made sure that no one, man or woman, was ever made to feel invisible again, because she knew the truth. The most powerful missions aren't always the loudest. Sometimes they're the quiet ones, the ones no one sees coming, the ones carried out by people the world underestimates. Until the moment they prove everyone wrong. Diane had been that person, the woman who served coffee to the generals, and then quietly solved their impossible mission. And in doing so, she didn't just save lives, she changed the game forever.